Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, John Chiang, he is the controller for the state of California. And I must tell you a story. About maybe 8 years ago, I went to a website that was operated by your staff, by your office, and it dealt with unclaimed assets. And the state of California has collected those unclaimed assets through banks or stock companies. And I found unclaimed assets of my two deceased grandparents who've never lived in California. How they wound up in California, I don't know. It was just 3 figures, but I was fascinated by that. Talk to us about that website and how it's changing.
Sure. So when I came into the controller's office, the unclaimed property program was broken. In fact, the federal judge said if I did not fix it, they were going to take it under federal receivership.
I didn't know that.
So we've changed the laws. Thank you to Governor Schwarzenegger, the prior legislature. They implemented my major reform package. Over the last 7 years, we've returned over $2.3 billion with a B. Dollars and over 158 million shares of stock. What happens is if somebody loses track of their property, for instance, you could be a student, you left a security deposit with a former landlord, you moved and they couldn't locate you. After 3 years, that money comes to the state and then I try to find you and return the money.
But how did my grandparents' money get to California? They've never lived in California.
Yeah,
any ideas?
Yeah, sometimes they link it up, right? So we'll use firms that will identify the property and you'll try to find the last local address or where that money is entitled to. And obviously, there's also a national database, but we try to identify who those monies are owed to.
Now, there's a new twist to this, and that deals with life insurance policies. Explain what you've recently uncovered.
So we've been doing this work actually for 5 years, and what had happened is that there's a master death file. So the insurance companies will check against this master death file whether somebody has passed away or not. The insurance companies had used it to stop paying annuities to people once they passed away. However, they also identified when somebody passed away, the person who purchased the property or the policy and wanted to leave it to a beneficiary. Now, the insurance companies weren't playing with the same rules on both sides. They didn't pay out once they identified that somebody else passed away.
So they knew the person died, so they didn't pay out on the annuity. They also knew who the beneficiary was, and the beneficiary, for whatever reason, didn't make a claim, and what they were doing is just not paying on the claim.
That's right. And in fact, what they would do is they would continue to charge those policies until those monies were extinguished. And so obviously there's nothing left.
They know the person died. How can they do that under the law?
Yeah, we felt the same way. So, we've worked with the insurance companies. We tried to get them to improve their practices, to do the right thing by the people. And so fortunately, we've had a handful of insurance companies come forward, agree with us, and that they're going to change their practices and return the monies to the people who deserve it.
So they'll reverse the premium charges that they've taken out of life insurance policies post-death. Are they going to be actively looking for beneficiaries?
They are going to apply the same practices that they currently use. So many of them use the death master. So if you're going to stop paying out the annuities, then you're going to check for those individuals who are entitled to the life insurance benefits.
Are they going to look for them? I guess that's the question. So they won't withdraw the premiums, but are they going to look for the beneficiaries?
Yes.
Okay, so when's this happening?
It's happening now.
As we speak, literally as we speak.
And so I would encourage people to go to my website. I have a specifically designated website, www.claimit.ca.gov.
And that's for general
unclaimed property.
Okay. How did you learn about this? How did you find out this was happening?
Well, we heard stories of this happening to individuals, and so we checked with the company who does the research on this, and so we actively pursued it.
Okay, I want to shift gears, if I may, sir, and speak about the state budget. You've been in Sacramento for a good amount of time. You've seen boom years, you've seen bust years. It's amazing we've gone from bust to boom pretty darn quickly. I know we had Prop 30 passed, which helped. I know that certain tax strategies helped the budget, helped revenues. In the final analysis, though, how do you feel as if this budget of California is doing today?
So this year's budget is balanced for what it is, right? It's made significant progress. At the end of April, the numbers were that we were $4.5 billion ahead of estimates. Now, I said April because they do something called the May revise, so they do significant revisions of the budget. So at the end of May, we actually had a $799 million surplus over the May numbers. Now, I want to put that in context.
Please.
Yes, we have a budget surplus. Let's remember that we had 5 very difficult years where we built up a significant deficit. So we need 7 or 8 of these $4.5 billion surplus years to take down just short-term debt. So we have to be long-term responsible. It's like you graduate from school. You and I are both lawyers.
Right.
You law school debt, mortgage debt, transportation debt. You have one good year, you make a lot of money, but that may not pay down all the debt.
Of course.
We have to do this for the long time.
You mentioned a surplus, and I was most fascinated by the following scenario. For many years, Wall Street has been dinging our credit rating because Wall Street said that our governors were providing projections that were simply too rosy. This cycle, what we found is a governor was accused of providing projections that were too pessimistic by the nonpartisan chief legislative analysts. What a difference a year makes. What do you make of that scenario?
I think the governor is being incredibly prudent. Obviously, we are subject to incredible risk. This isn't during our lifetime, Brad, where the United States economy was about 36% of the world's GDP.
Right.
Today, we're below 23% of the world's GDP. So we are heavily dependent on economic activity throughout the globe.
Of course.
Europe's struggling. China's economy is slowing down. It has huge implications for California's economy.
But who was right? Was it the governor's more pessimistic projections or the chief legislative analyst's more optimistic projections?
Well, it's yet to be seen. Obviously, if we have those additional revenues, we still have significant debt. Most of that debt's owed to education, so it's a good thing. More money, we can pay down debt, and we can give more money to K through 14 education.
What's interesting is part of the budget, though, the legislature agreed to use the governor's projections, the lower amount. Was that the wise thing to do in your mind?
Yeah, the governor at the end of the day has to sign the budget.
He does.
So
But aside from the politics of it, do you think that was the fiscally prudent thing to do, to use the more pessimistic projections?
Absolutely.
You mentioned paying down education debt. I don't know that everyone really understands what happened over the last few years. What happened?
So that same things I'll share with as I
Yeah.
spoke to the rating agencies. We had to employ tremendous and many cash management tools, never seen before in the history of the state of California.
Right.
So we did deferrals, administrative deferrals. One of the tough actions I had to take is I didn't pay people their tax refunds on time in February of 2009 because we didn't have enough money. The state of California had $2.7 billion to pay $10 billion worth of bills. I took tough action to make sure that California today isn't insolvent.
Right.
That's what I was trying to prevent. I issued IOUs.
I remember.
Then, because I didn't want to do all the deferrals myself, I had the legislature implement deferrals because I thought there ought to be public discussion and debate. We also do short-term borrowing called RANs. We do other types of short-term borrowing, could be RAWs. And then this state has been operating in cash deficit since July 13th, 2007. We have borrowed up to $21 billion in internal borrowables. Internal.
That's the key. You're borrowing from yourself.
In that one case, right? We did internal, external deferrals, all those things just to keep California from drowning in debt.
Prop 98 requires that about 40% of the state budget go to K-12. We weren't paying that 40%?
No, we've not all of it, right? So you had deferrals, and there's also 3 different tests under Prop 98.
Oh my!
Right, so it can change how much you actually pay for K through 14 education.
But right now, I mean, we hear that we're paying back K-12. What exactly does that mean? We're paying back K-12.
So we are paying back some of the monies, but we still owe them a lot more.
So, in other words, the children that are being educated today will see the fruit of these debt repayments, and the children of yesteryear just suffered?
They did suffer. The education community bore a lot of the responsibility financially while the state was trying to get through a crisis.
Looking forward, how do you feel? Do you think that we'll stay either in the black or above red?
We see strong economic activity on the real estate front. Obviously, the most recent 6-month period has been one of the fastest times of growth in family household wealth. And that's because we know real estate market's recovering, but we're not sure. And then stock market's at an all-time high, or
no doubt.
Generally over this period.
His name is John Chiang, Controller for the State of California, candidate for Treasurer in 2014. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.
The state of California is currently in possession of how much money in unclaimed property? $900 million, $2.2 billion, $4.6 billion, or $6.1 billion? The state of California is holding more than $6.1 billion in unclaimed property belonging to approximately 17.6 million individuals and organizations.
It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Ed Chau, he is a member of the California State Assembly. You are finishing your first, it's not called term, first year, I guess you could say, first session. How is it going? How's your new job?
It's going well. I'm very excited about my job, and it's great to be a part of this institution because I have the opportunity to effectuate changes that impact the entire state of California, all 38 million people.
Right, but what's interesting is your story is an inspiring one. You were raised in Hong Kong, of Chinese descent, and you represent, I believe it's the only majority API district in the state.
That is correct.
How is that? I mean, that's got to be really gratifying.
It is indeed, very much so. And on top of that, I also retain my language ability.
Right.
I speak Cantonese and Mandarin, so that helps out a lot.
And the folks that are of Chinese descent in your district, are they mainly Mandarin speakers or Cantonese speakers?
They are actually a pretty good combination of Mandarin and Cantonese speaking.
Because I've spoken with some folks, Phil Hu, for example, who represents San Gabriel on the school board, and they're thinking about launching a immersion program, dual language, and they're focusing on Mandarin.
Sure.
You know, not Cantonese, and Spanish as well. So it's interesting to hear that. I want to ask you about the budget process. And if I can, let's focus on the local control funding formula.
Absolutely.
Because I have to think that that seriously impacts your API community in the 49th, is it?
That's correct.
49th Assembly District. Parts of this local control funding formula focus on English language learners and giving additional funding to those that are ESL students. Talk to me about that and how it's been received in the 49th.
Well, it generally has been pretty well received because I think many of the school districts within the 49th Assembly District do have a lot of English learners. So as a result, the funding formula is going to benefit many of them. Yet there are some districts that are not as diverse, for example. So I think the bottom line still is this policy that we are implementing is going to benefit everybody.
There's no doubt that through negotiations, we know that the base grant is coming in at pre-recession levels. So as you had suggested, it will benefit everybody. Yes, because everyone's going to get their base grant brought up. But some could say it benefits each district differently because there are some, like you had suggested, with more in the three categories that we mentioned. And the more well-heeled districts will not see those additional bumps. What are those districts saying to you? You represent some of those well-heeled districts. I mean, yes, they have, quote, wealthier populations, but they're not going to get as much money.
Well, the bottom line still is everybody's going to benefit. And, you know, when you have a policy, you sometimes, you cannot please everybody, so to speak.
That is true.
So you got to have a balance between, let's say, you know, the haves and the have-nots. But I think, you know, overall, this is the best solution we can have at this point in light of the circumstances.
I want to also speak about language in a different context. As we know, the courts are facing a crisis. The Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court came to testify. You may have been there about how the courts are being underfunded. So in the backdrop of that challenge, you have presented a bill, which I would presume is particularly needed in your communities, deals with language access to our courts. If you can, sir, set forth the challenge, and then we'll talk about your bill.
Absolutely. As I started to mention, California has 38 million people, and of that figure, many of them actually speak a language other than English. In fact, 40% of them do that, and 1/4 of them are born outside of the United States. So as such, language assistance is absolutely necessary, particularly when they enter a courthouse. So if they have a case, whether they're a plaintiff or defendant, they have to be represented fairly, because if they do not understand the language, then they would be put in a disadvantage. So the bill that I presented essentially would require the Judicial Council to develop a statewide plan to access the language needs of these people who utilize our court system.
This would be civil and criminal.
Yes.
Where do we stand today? I used to be a lawyer. You had been a lawyer as well, and I recall there being interpreters available.
Right.
So there are interpreters available, no?
Absolutely. For most of the criminal cases, in certain domestic violence cases,
Right.
we do provide interpreters. But in most civil cases, we do not.
So intuitively, it would seem fair that we provide that, but there's a cost.
Sure.
Should the cost be borne by the state for the civil matter, or should it be borne by the litigants?
Well, now, right now, the bill is written in such a way that this plan will only be implemented if there is funding available.
I see.
Now, in light of that, it's very clear that the U.S. government also requires that we provide language access to everyone, regardless of whether or not funding is there.
Civil and criminal.
Both correct. And in
Interesting.
fact, there is pending investigation by the U.S. DOJ, the Department of Justice, that is looking into some of the instances that's happening in the Los Angeles area in light of some access issues. So I think before the DOJ issues any investigative
Right.
findings or brings a lawsuit, I think we should be in
Maybe
compliance.
So as a lawyer yourself, I'm sure you are particularly attuned to the funding crises. You probably suffered them when you were litigating just last year before you entered the assembly. What is the report as to whether the courts are going to receive more funding in light of the dramatic cuts they've seen over the last few years?
Now, the recent budget that we just adopted will allocate $63 million to the court system.
More.
That's right, 63 more, 60 million more. Now, however, I think the ask was a lot more than that. I think the initial ask was like $100 million, if not more.
Right.
So I think that will ease the burden somewhat. And I think that obviously we don't want to see any courthouses being closed down.
But
and
they
because-
are.
They are, yes. So
They are.
Absolutely.
Do you represent portions of San Bernardino County?
No, I do
You
not.
just go into
Just
LA County.
LA County.
Yeah, I mean, just on the other side of the border,
Right.
you know, we are seeing court closures in San Bernardino County.
Right.
It's been a real challenge.
Absolutely.
I want to ask about students.
Sure.
As we speak today, and events could move,
Sure.
there is a debate going on about student loan rates
Sure.
at the federal level. Let's put that aside for a moment.
Right.
You have a bill that's focusing on disclosure
Right.
with regard to student loans. Why don't you tell us about that bill, the need for it, and what you hope to achieve?
Absolutely. As we know, the cost of attending college is ever increasing.
Oh, yes.
So in order for us to encourage students to pursue higher education, we have to provide them with all the necessary resources for them to succeed. And having the ability to fund these costs or tuition is very necessary. So oftentimes when students apply to colleges, they do not get adequate funding, let's say in terms of grants or scholarships. So in many instances, they have to provide or to obtain loans to fill that gap. Privately. So the issue then there is many of these loans are private, obviously, but then they are uncapped. For example, the interest rate could be a variable rate, and also there are many risks associated with them. So the bill, what it will do is that it will provide the student with more information on these different various programs. For example, how much does it take to go through, to borrow, for example.
But will it be readable? I mean, we all have gotten loans. I admit I'm focused on the home loan side.
Right.
Pages and pages and pages. You don't know what you're looking at. You don't
Sure.
know what you're signing. You know, can you draft this bill, sir? I'm begging and pleading in such a way where, you know, we're just given one card and it says, this is what the loan cost, instead of just pages of gibberish.
Yeah, well, that's one of the goals of my bill.
Right.
Essentially, it will allow the student be able to access information, via website information.
Right.
So, yeah, it's so hopefully it will simplify the process.
That's the key.
Yes.
So where do we stand with your two bills, if I may? The language access bill, has that been passed yet?
The language access bill has passed the Senate subcommittee
Okay.
hearing, and it will hit the floor very soon.
And already out of the assembly.
Correct.
And then what about the student loan bill? Same?
That is still being worked on.
Okay, terrific.
Yes, in the assembly.
Well, I congratulate you again on joining the California State Assembly. I can tell that you are really enjoying your new job. I can only imagine what you must have thought coming to America from Hong Kong and how dreaming to be in the California State Assembly, maybe not the dream you expected, but one that came true.
Great.
His name is Ed Chau. He is a member of the California State Assembly. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
In the first quarter of 2013, How much student loan debt has been racked up in the United States? $439 billion, $722 billion, $986 billion, or $1.12 trillion. Outstanding student loan debt in the first quarter of 2013 totaled a record $986 billion.
You're watching Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance, and our guest is Bob Bruesch. He is the clerk for the Garvey School District, which includes portions of Monterey Park, Rosemead, and San Gabriel. And so I want to speak with you about what's known as the Local Control Funding Formula, LCFF. In my opinion, it is a revolution in education funding. Is that your opinion?
In my opinion, it's about time.
But is it a revolution in your mind? I understand it's about time, but is it as a significant change as I believe it is?
Absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely, without question. We've gone through many years of assuming that children from all homes have the background, the educational background that is equal, and it is not true.
And so what we know under the formula is that for each student that falls into one of three categories, be it English language learners, be it foster kids or economically disadvantaged, 20% bump per kid. But then in school districts with 55% of students in that category, they will get a 50% bump. Garvey, as an example, will get
probably a 50% bump
because
of the concentration of non-English, limited English learners.
So what do you make of that? I think a lot of folks would agree that a 20% bump per child would make sense. But when school districts get a 50% bump for a total of 70%, and that's only certain school districts, there's a little trepidation.
Let me give you an example. In terms of access to the internet and other things that modern technology that kids use in their home, there is a great cleft between those who can afford it and those who cannot afford it.
The digital divide, we know, is quite traumatic.
And with education moving the direction it is toward integrating technology in everything that a child does in the classroom, through the No Child Left Behind and also the Common Core standards, this cleft between the haves and the haves not is tremendous. It is meaning that the kids starting out in kindergarten and using a computer or a laptop have never seen one before, maybe. You know.
I want to ask you about another category. I've asked this question before. There's no doubt that children in the three categories I just mentioned face certain challenges. There's also a different group that may face challenges, and those are gifted students. And let me explain why. In my experience and my understanding, if a gifted student is bored, they're a terror. They're a tyrant. They are a huge discipline problem. And I understand that most categoricals were eliminated, and I believe the categorical for gifted students. What's your sense of that question?
All school districts, including mine, have gifted programs. They're not just like other funded programs. They do not get enough money to really meet the needs of the children. However, we have entered the age of technology, and with that, we can provide more services to the gifted child. But saying that, if you look at the new Common Core standards, they are aiming at the thinking ways of gifted children too. They demand that programs be given to gifted children just as they would the everyday child, and make them think. And let's face it, education is meant to get kids to think.
I want to talk about Common Core.
Okay.
Common Core is before us. California is one of 45 states which has adopted Common Core. it sets certain national standards, and it's, I guess, 2 years off. You are now a teacher to the teachers. And there's no doubt that public school teachers in California are going to have to teach differently. So, Mr. Teacher to the teachers, what are you teaching the teachers about Common Core?
Well, I'll begin by saying that the Common Core is going to change everything we do in education, everything. It begins with the teacher training, it begins with what happens in the classroom, and it begins with the way we evaluate our teachers. Common Core is aiming at the idea that, you know, you've got to get kids to discuss things, to plan things out, because that's what they're going to be expected to do in the real world.
And so, as I understand it, as a metaphor, as an example, instead of just a bubbleized test, they may still fill in the bubbles, but then they're going to have to write an explanation as to why they filled in that bubble.
Exactly. And why not let them bubble in the Mona Lisa on their sheet?
It's an interesting way to look at it. I also want to get a sense from you, though, about kids that are kind of in the middle. I know you used to teach 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. Mm-hmm. I have a 4th grader and a 6th grader. So they're going to get caught up in the middle of the shift to Common Core. How do we deal with those students? The ones that are just entering, they'll be fine. The ones that are leaving, it is what it is.
I believe you've probably heard the old saying, you know, we always lose them in the middle grades.
Right, yes.
They lose them,
yes.
Okay? I served on 2 statewide commissions that looked at the middle school. The last one was caught in the middle.
Interesting.
And we made all sorts of recommendations. And basically, they were looked at, then put up on the shelf and forgotten. Right. That age group is probably the most critical in terms of these new Common Core standards, because in the primary grades, you're teaching skills and like that. In the middle schools, you're helping the kids organize those skills so they can use them in learning the higher level of...
But think about this. Not only are they moving from tween to teen to adulthood, but they're now, the kids that happen to be in that age range, are going to have to learn a completely different way. I mean, this is a tough group. I mean, these are the kids that got hammered by the recession. I mean, they really, kids born in the beginning of this century, they really have had a tough road with public education.
Exactly. And we all know, and you're entering it with your own children, we all know that kids at that age don't change over a couple weeks. They change hourly.
Literally.
You know, literally, yeah.
So maybe, are they malleable enough to deal with the shift to Common Core?
Okay. Actually, my experience, and I will base it on 40 years of teaching, my experience with this group is that they have all the energy in the world, and they have all the desire in the world. If you say, guys, we're going to build a ladder to the moon, they say, okay, where's the hammer?
Off we go, yeah.
Yeah, off we go. And as long as they are active together within their group of peers, and you have the ability to guide that energy, they're going to learn, and they're going to do a good job.
What about the teachers? I mean, they're set in their ways. How are they going to face these changes?
Well, I'll tell you, I was one of the last teachers in this state to get a junior high credential. I truly believe that we should go back to getting a specific credential.
So it's K-8 or 9-12 now?
Yes.
Right? Interesting.
Yeah, and because those teachers need specialized training. Right. They really do, and they have to have an energy level which is a little bit higher than the other two ends of the spectrum, but the rewards that you get from those kids, the tweeners, it's just unbelievable when they come up and do things.
I hope you're right, because I'm on the verge of this with going into 6th, going into 4th. I mean, the thought of it is frightening, but I appreciate what you're doing both for the kids and the teachers, and he is the clerk of the Garvey School District. His name is Bob Bruesch. My name is Brad Pomerance, and you are watching Charter California Edition.